Hello, everyone, or should I say good morning, as it's morning here in lovely Kobe, Japan, and it's another episode of Notaku Anime Chat. And I hope you enjoyed our special season preview episode. And we're already sort of in the fall season, as we'll talk about. But we have some other things to discuss today. So let me welcome from the great state of Minnesota, in the great country of America, on the great planet of Earth, Setsuken. How you doing, Setsuken?
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm doing good.
Oh, that's nice. Okay. And as you know, the tradition on Notaku Anime Chat is that we say what Hunter x Hunter character we would like to go on a cross country road trip with if we had to do that. So, since that's our weekly tradition, but you may not be aware of our weekly tradition, I'll go first and give you time to think about it. My answer is going to be Melioran because Melioran, for those of you who don't remember, is the chameleon in the Chimera Ant arc, the one who's always got a smoke going and has a little goatee, the hipster chameleon, as I call him. And I would have been tempted by Ikarugo, the Octobro, as I call him, but Melioran is he's a bro too. He's like a total hipster dude. You know, he's got a good taste in music. Plus, if you get in any trouble on the road trip, he can make you and him invisible and get you out of it. So Melioran is my pick there, the hipster chameleon. The only problem is no smoking in the car, so he's going to have to wait for the smoke breaks on that. But other than that, I think he'd be really good. So Setsuken, what would you say is your answer on that question?
Probably Leario, just because he's a doctor. Anybody else, I would be very scared to hang out with, just because they're all kind of really eccentric and problematic in their own ways,
Mm.
and that's one of the reasons why I think whether it's the core cast or any of the side characters, they're in the groups that they are because everybody that's with them can keep up with them. So yeah, Hunter x Hunter is not one of those, does not feature one of those characters that I would want to hang out with, but I
Mm.
enjoy watching them for sure.
Yeah, Leorio was one of my backup picks too. Actually, not because he was a doctor, but just because he's also kind of a bro in a way. You know, he'd be kind of a bro to hang out with. Kurapika, way too dark. Gone and Killua. Well, first of all, who wants to be stuck in a car with a kid that age for a
Oh my
week?
god.
But then they're also both like insanely powerful and dangerous. So yeah, for me, it would definitely be Melioran, but Leorio also a good choice. Okay. Well, we want to start off this week, if we could, by talking about some feedback we've gotten from our listeners. So one of the things that's really nice, Setsuken, is we've been starting to get, in addition to lots of questions, which we have so many this week, I may not even get to all of them, but also a lot of feedback from our listeners, which we obviously appreciate. Well, I appreciate it. I don't know about you. But from my site, LIA, we have from Jan, who says, this is now my officially favorite podcast to listen to while working out. He notes, I was going to say while at the gym, but that's not really a thing at the moment. The only problem, not enough podcast for the whole week. So, as if someone could complain that our podcasts are not long enough, I never thought I would hear that. But thank you very much, Jan. We appreciate it.
Yeah, I think so. Two things. Jan is officially my favorite person this week, for sure, because of how nice he is. But I think we're actually on the shorter end of the podcast spectrum. Podcasts can go up to 2 hours. I know Joe Rogan does like 4 to 5 hours, which is crazy. But I have gotten the feedback as well that from people I know and from people that listen to the podcast, and they all say that like 2 hours is too long, and that's we try to go less than 2 hours. So it's interesting to hear that there are people that definitely like the podcast enough to listen to it. I definitely hear you as well. Sometimes when you have a good podcast, it's hard to get, you know, that fill every day because you get used to it. So thank you, Jan, very much.
Yeah, I guess for me, 2 hours is probably the outside of where I would ever want to listen to, just personally. But hey, I guess if it's good enough, you never want it to stop, right? So my next comment is also from one of our Lost in Anime listeners, Blue Blue, who's a regular here from France. And Blue Blue this week he says, regarding this is the Dragon Quest Dai non Daiboken. Uh, so again, I stress that the Dai only has Dragon Quest brand and the setup of heroic with capital H fantasy grade adventure, but it doesn't really have an RPG or video game, contrary to the Dragon Quest manga made by Enix. After Enix created its own manga magazines. Of course, due to the setup and its seniority, it spouses some codes. So much of that, I was hearing what the adults sound like in the Peanuts cartoon series. Wop, 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 wop. So I'm going to let Setsuken tackle the answer to Blue Blue's feedback there.
Yeah, so Blue Blue coming in with like the first real correction. So thank you very much, Blue Blue, for doing that. I hate to be wrong, especially on a podcast like this where we're giving information. But basically, what he's saying, Guardian Enzo, is that the manga in question that's being adapted into an anime actually doesn't have too much to do with the games. So it's kind of its own separate thing. It's not the same as the Enix manga that was made later on. So that was news to me. And it was probably because of the fact that it was related to the games that I didn't consider it too strongly. So maybe there's a second look that needs to be taken on this. And once it airs, I'll probably go through and check it out. So thank you, Blue Blue. That was a great correction. And thank you to anybody who would make sure that we don't put any misinformation out there.
Okay, so the gist of it is Blue Blue is makes you more interested rather than less based on what he said.
Yes, based on the correction that he's made. So
Okay, thank
yes.
you. Okay, he also says, by the way, that Dai was a huge commercial success but that Roto, made by Enix, was not. So there you go. So, and lastly, from the feedback front, we have from Flare Knight, who I believe is known to you. Is he not? Um, an associate from your own website, I believe. Yes,
Yes, yes. He's one of the writers and the bloggers there.
and
One of the most consistent writers besides you
a
that
preview
has.
writer. Yes.
Yes, and he does write previews every season as well.
Yeah. Okay. And Flare Knight says, "I'm not. This is regarding the gatekeeping thing from a couple weeks ago, which struck quite a chord with a lot of people. I would say. I'm not sure we're really talking about gatekeeping in the gatekeeping topic. I disagree, just for the record. Sounds like disagreements from different kinds of fans yelling past each other. Doesn't feel like people who want different kinds of shows or those who are fine with what there is are gatekeeping anything. Just people feeling like their viewpoints or preferences are under attack. In some ways, I'd say that the title for that section of the summary kind of perfectly reflects what's going on. Feeling so under attack for wanting something different that the only response is to attack right back and call out what others like as mediocrity. Um,
Before you answer this, I selected this comment and I want to highlight why. Because I think some of this feedback is very important. And it goes back to the title of the episode, I think. The title of the episode, maybe, because I was the one who titled it, maybe could have been better. Because I think it sets up a false expectation. And then, Guardian Enzo, you actually wrote the summary. And as he kind of said, the summary better outlines what the topic actually is about. So to me, the thing I got out of this piece of feedback was the fact that I need to do better with titles whenever I come up with them, and it is a bit of a challenge because you want the title to be a couple of words, you want it to be easy to kind of understand what's going on. But I think for me that was a bit of a miss. So I appreciate Flare Knight keeping me honest here. This is something I could definitely do better.
okay. The only thing I will say is just a fundamental disagreement. I think with the core premise of the comment, which is that I do think it is gatekeeping. I don't think the fact that it is gatekeeping it was central to our discussion, which is really where I think your response comes in. But nevertheless, I do disagree on the fundamental premise that it's not gatekeeping, because I do think there is gatekeeping happening in the manner that I suggested. It just that I think organically the conversation sort of moved on to the larger point of where anime is right now and where it's going, which a lot of our discussions seem to wander back to that topic in the end, don't they? But in any case, a thank you, Flare Knight. As always, I disagree with you, but I, of course, welcome feedback, and especially from someone who's very in touch with with where the industry is like you are. So please feel free to give more feedback. Just because I disagree with it doesn't mean I don't want to hear it. So thank you very much for that. And to all of our listeners who provide feedback, just like the ones who provide questions, we sincerely appreciate it. And now we move on to what, if that was the prologue, we move on to what I would call the main body of the podcast, which our regular listeners may be getting into the rhythm now of how that works. And you know that the first section will be something along the lines of
What we're watching.
this is a section that's obviously going to really pick up in the next couple of weeks because the new season will be starting. But we're at the end of the season right now, such as it was, one of the most abortive seasons in anime history for obvious reasons. But what we're watching this week, there are a couple of notable things that I think both of us want to call to your attention. I'll let you go first, Setsuken, if you'd like to.
Sure. So I'm going to mention two things, and I want your opinion on both of them.
Okay.
So let's start with Made in Abyss because we both seen the movie now. I saw it actually yesterday. So I got the pay per view a while ago, and then I was just stressed out on time. And I kind of, from what you had told me, this is dark. And, when somebody says it's darker than the series, I was like, well, I don't know if I want to watch it quite yet. I need to steel myself. And so I put it off till the last possible day I could watch it. And I will say, it was very dark. It was a bit too dark for me,
Mm,
almost. Like,
mm,
I'm almost worried if Made in Abyss. So, before this movie, I recommended Made in Abyss to everybody I saw. And I gave them the warning, there's some parts where it gets a little difficult to watch, but it's worth it.
mm.
I felt the movie, with its higher budget and its more focused story, went a bit too far. Some of the scenes were like a slasher movie level of grotesque. And I
Okay.
don't know if I want to watch that stuff. Like some of the scenes and the gore there. This is at a point now where I wonder if we're going a bit too far. And I know you had mentioned, something about the mangaka and how they were kind of maybe a little bit too into some of the torture and some of the other scenes that they depict. And I'm starting to very much think that this might be something that pushes me away from Made in Abyss. When I watched it originally, I had a very visceral reaction. I felt like sick
Mm,
after it.
mm.
And it's gotten better with some time and some distance. And yeah, so I don't know. What I want to talk about it a little bit. Do you think it went too far, or is it still in the okay range for you?
Well, let me say I've been open in the past that I have a comfort level that gets breached by this series quite a bit, and I will never be driven away from it. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and I don't think there's anything it could do to drive me away from it. Nevertheless, I want to say I was having a conversation online with our pal Jake, the translator, whose name may come up again later in our podcast. We'll see. But he, as you know, translated the Made in Abyss anime and movies. And he tells me a couple of interesting things. First of all, that there's another arc coming up, which will be in the next movie, which he says is even worse than this
Oh
one.
no.
Um, and also, we talked about the recommendation thing. It's funny you mentioned it because I was telling him how I find it. This is a tough series on the recommendation front because on the one hand, you want to recommend it to people because it's visually, it's unbelievably gorgeous. I mean, it's in my top 5 most visually beautiful anime of all time, no exaggeration. And it's an incredibly brilliant story with really great. I mean, it's the writing is god tier, but people are going to see things here and they're going to go, dude, what are you telling me to watch? So I think you have to be very, very careful with who you recommend Made in Abyss to. Um, and I love Made in Abyss, but there are times when it's incredibly difficult to watch. Incredibly difficult to watch. And it is because bad things happen to the characters, but and it we react viscerally more to it because they're children and cute. But there are times when you do feel like the mangaka has a relish for this that makes you uncomfortable. And that's the only thing. and I was telling Jake this, the only thing I can really compare this to is the Chimera Ant arc of Hunter x Hunter, which similarly gets incredibly dark, existentially dark, soul crushingly dark, not just gory, violent so much, but the way it despairing and bleak. But it's a different sort of fucked up than Made in Abyss is. And I never quite get the feeling that Togashi, it's not as hard to make the connection between the point Togashi is trying to make and the way he makes it as it is sometimes. I never get the feeling that says, "Oh, Togashi took that too far." I always get the feeling that Togashi did that for a specific reason in his story. Whereas there are times I feel with Made in Abyss where it's done more so than it needs to be just because the author likes it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree with you. And on top of that, so there's the themes, which I think are dark, and I don't think dark themes are bad,
No.
but the depiction and the very visual depiction of some of the stuff that happens, that's what disturbs me. And I don't think it adds anything to the story. So you can imply things. I think it's the same thing with sex as it is with violence.
Yeah.
You can imply things and get the point across without going into excessive detail. And I think in this case, it was too much detail for me, and I'm questioning whether I want to continue the series. I just don't know if I can stomach it, honestly.
Um, I'll watch it no matter what. That's my only response, but I totally get where you're coming from. We also had just as a sidelight on Made in Abyss talking about gender, which is another kind of a commonality it has with Togashi, who loves his androgynous characters. But the question of whether specifically Marulk and Nanachi are whether their gender is confirmed or not. Because of course Jake has to make that decision when he's translating it very specifically. It's a practical matter for him, and his view is this is never out and out confirmed in either case, which I sort of get. Although I have to say, I think Marulk's gender is everything but confirmed. I mean, I don't think it could. I mean, maybe it isn't literally confirmed, but I think he makes it very clear what gender he is, and I say he because he's a he. But Nanachi is an interesting one because until I saw Jake's comment on this, it never even occurred to me that Nanachi's gender was supposed to be ambiguous. I always just assumed Nanachi was a girl. But after he pointed it out, I kind of thought about it and I said, well, yeah, I guess they never really did say what gender Nanachi was. And when you look at Nanachi's human form from the flashback arc, she or he, they, it is a pretty androgynous character design. And in fact, the mangaka has specifically said in Nanachi's case that the gender is supposed to be unclear. So did it ever occur to you that Nanachi could be a boy, Setsuken? Just curious.
Yeah, I mean, the way Made in Abyss is set up, gender, and a lot of those things are put into question, and that's where it's almost like related to anime and sci-fi a little bit, even though it's a fantasy series. There's elements of that like almost cyberpunk sci-fi there, where things like gender get questioned and a lot of other like concepts get questioned in this series. So that I think is very interesting, and I would say shout out to Jake. Go follow him on Twitter because he talks about this in his Twitter threads as well.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to even read. So one of the good Twitter accounts to follow. But yes, I don't want to get too much into Made in Abyss, even though I brought it up.
Okay.
But yeah, I think we covered it at length as much as we can, and there is something else I want to talk about, which I think is less cut and draw, less ambiguous than Made in Abyss is for me, because I'm still not sure if I want to continue it or not.
Okay. What's your other series?
Yahari ore no seishun wa machigaiteru. A love comedy wa machigaiteru. I always miss the love comedy. So this is a series that ended yesterday as well. So I watched Made in Abyss, and then right after that, as almost a palate cleanser, I decided to torture myself with something else, which was Yahari. And so the issue with Yahari that I think you will empathize with is that it ended in a way where it was almost counter to all the buildup that we had seen from the series up till that point.
Oh, like Yesterday Wa Utate, you mean?
Yeah, like a ton of series Two Tears was, I think, one of them. Where Orimo was even one of
Oh,
them.
don't even go there. True Tears gave me the exact ending that it built up to, and I won't hear otherwise.
What?
Absolutely 100% on point. But that's another. All right, put that down on the list of possible topics for future podcasts. Anyway, go. Yahari, go.
Yeah, so Yahari, that's basically what happened. It resolved in a way where they had been developing the third season, and the third season wasn't the best either. And it just destroyed me. It destroyed me because everything that was good about the series was undone in the last two episodes. And it's been a long time since I've seen a series that it has a phenomenal first season, a phenomenal second season, an okay third season, and then just falls flat on its face and embarrasses itself in the last episode. So that was like really painful. And I was wondering if you could kind of empathize with that and how you kind of deal with a disappointment on that level where 90% of something is really good, but the last 10% is so bad that it almost like leaves a sour taste in your mouth.
Well, yes, and I've already mentioned. Let me just say for the record, I dropped Yahari in the first season, and I haven't really followed it since. So I can't specific. I have no horse in this race. But yes, yesterday Wo Tate is my perfect example where I felt that the anime was building up in a certain direction and then sprung an ending that was completely unsupported by what had gone before. And I have since read the manga and realized that even though I still disagree with the direction it went, at least I felt in the manga it was supported by some buildup. And you realize that as good as the Yesterday Wo Tate anime was, they cut out a shitload of stuff, um, which is what happens when long series get made into one core anime, but that's another story. But yeah, there are other series. Another one that comes to mind is the second season of Shingeki Bahamut. You know that one?
Oh god, I dropped that midway
Yeah,
through.
which I really liked the second season, although there was one character I hated, and then that character ended up being, kind of lionized in the end when he should have been vilified, and it did just a complete jump to shark ending. So yes, I do empathize with you, not in this specific case, only for the simple reason that I haven't seen this specific series since the first season. I actually like Girlish Number better by the same author. But yes, I totally that really sucks when you love a show and it completely blows the ending. But as a Gynax fan, I'm kind of used to it. They were legendary for it, although they're not in every case by any stretch of the imagination. Let me ask you this: do you know if they went with a faithful ending to the novels, or did they come up with an original anime ending? Do you have any idea?
Oh yeah, yeah. They went faithful to the novels, and a lot of the fan base really liked the ending, and that
Mm.
was like the salt on top of the wound because this was a love triangle at its core. The story was right,
Yeah.
and so the love triangle got resolved, and it seems like most of the fan base, at least on Reddit and online in the discussion, was more interested in the fact that their particular girl won and less so about the fact that even if you were a fan, and I was kind of 50-50
Hmm.
by the end, I would have been fine with either girl, but the way they built it up, nobody had a problem with it. So that's another thing is like, have you also found yourself in a situation where you see something to be so terribly wrong and yet everybody else doesn't see it or care?
Yeah, I have. Um, but the one thing I think you have to accept, and this is hard for me as it's hard for everybody, but you have to accept that what we do here, this is a subjective art form, and it's the same. It's the same with endings. True Tears is a perfect example. One I thought was a great ending, and you thought was exactly an example of the sort of shark jumpage that you're referring to. We both watched the same series, and we agree a lot more often than we disagree. But yet we have totally divergent views on that, which I suspect is not the last time we'll be discussing it as ideas are percolating in my head. But the one thing I will say, because you mentioned Oremo briefly earlier, do light novels have a tendency of flubbing the ending more often than manga, do you think?
I'm wondering. So I think it's not just anime because it's not just light novels because I think in recent memory manga have done the same thing.
Okay.
Like I think it's just been so it's been Fairy Tale. I think is a big one. that whole entire final season was terrible. I don't know. I think it's just is it more so the fact that writers these days just don't care about the ending as much as the journey to get there?
I hope not. I hope not. I rather than that, my theory would be it's just that endings are hard. Endings are the hardest part of a story, and even good stories often have weak endings. And I think it's because endings are the hardest part to get right. I don't think I think Occam's razor tells me that's the most logical explanation.
I'm gonna believe in that, and I will say thank you for humoring me. I know we went a bit long here, but this was a therapy session that I think I needed. Even though I talked about it on my blog and stuff like that, it's just, and I'm curious to see what the listeners think about this as well. So write into us and let me know if you watched Yahari. What did you think of it? And just this interesting situation where sometimes you really love something and it hurts all the more, I think, when it explodes in your face like this.
Only the things we really love have the ability to hurt us that much, don't though. That's the point, I think. If we don't love it in the first place, it can't hurt us that much when it screws up. All right, so my what we're watching stuff, just a couple of brief quick hits. Great Pretender is back, and the final season was the final season, really. They're calling it season 2. Basically, the last 9 episodes of the series are one long arc. So they did 4 or 5 episode arcs, and then the last season is one long arc. That's back, and I've only watched the first episode so far just because it's been a busy week. I've heard some interesting feedback, which I'm trying to avoid because it's borderline spoilery, but it sounds like it's a little bit divisive with the fan base, the last arc, but first episode was great. Jujutsu Kaisen, which we talked about in the season preview. I just want to mention this because the first episode was out internationally streamed for free for a day on YouTube, and I did watch it. Did a first impressions post for it on Lost in Anime, and I actually saw this episode at the Kyoto Manga Anime Fair, which I now know why they showed it because they were releasing it on YouTube. But that was a raw, and I got about 80-90% of it right, which is partially because I can start to grasp the Japanese a little better now, but more because this isn't the sort of series where you really need a deep level of understanding. It's pretty obvious what's going on. Pretty decent premiere. I know you haven't seen it yet, Setsuken, but a pretty decent premiere. It has a very generic insert Weekly Shonen Jump adjectives here in description kind of quality to it. But it was a good premiere, pretty well animated, pretty snappy, a very derivative, kind of self-derivative WSJ storyline and characters, but entertaining enough. So potential for growth there. Not a series I have high expectations for, but read my first impressions post on it if you want more detail. And then the one I think we can both talk about a little bit is Fugo Keiji, the Millionaire Detective, which had, because it was Noitamina, it was easy to forget this was a Noitamina show, but it was. It ended this week at 11 episodes, as they usually do. And it was a pretty good ending, I thought, for a pretty good series. It ended up basically being Batman, really. I mean, it ended up
I
being,
really liked what you said in your. Yeah, I
yeah,
was gonna say that is a very good description of it.
I mean, it ended up being Batman with a twist of maybe Black Panther. It ended up being a flat out superhero comic book, which is fine, and it did that pretty well. I would have liked it better if it had kind of stayed the route of the character driven, gritty, dark buddy cop story with comedic twists. And I'm fine with checking my disbelief at the door. I'd had plenty of suspension of disbelief, which I needed for the last few episodes. It was fine. It was entertaining. It was not as entertaining for me though as it would have been if it had kind of stayed the course of what it looked like it was going to be for the first 7 or 8 episodes. That's my take on Millionaire Detective. How about yourself?
Yeah, I like the ending as well. I agree. I called it a fun, neat little series in my tweet. I am working on a review for it. I don't know if I'll actually finish it, but the review, not the series. But yeah, a Batman. I didn't make that connection. I was thinking it was more James Bond, but but the millionaire and that whole thing. It's definitely Batman. I agree with you there. So I like Batman, and I like this Japanese take on the concept. And then there's the whole like there's enough differences I think from a typical superhero story that I think it's good, but I
Hmm.
think definitely near the end it goes that route. And if they do a continuation, and that might happen because if it does well, then I think it'll definitely be in that superhero territory moving forward.
I assume. What's interesting to me is I have no idea how faithful this ending was to the novel. Because of course Kato isn't even in the novel, and he's one of the co-leads of the anime. So
Really?
they had to change a lot of stuff. So as I don't know how much the ending, it may be a completely anime original ending, it may be a twist on on the novel ending. I have, and this is by the way not a light novel; it's a novel. So I have no idea. Just a refresher, we talked about this. This is the novelist who did The Girl Who Leapt Through Time and Paprika. So this is a pretty well established figure in Japanese novel and anime circles, actually. So yeah, I mean, and this is a sort of series. I don't expect it to do that well commercially, but it is the sort of series just based on the narrative standpoint. It could easily support a second season. It just has that feeling to it. Just plug the characters in and give them some new wacky shit to do. It would be a fun. It's basically, yeah. When Batman ends, you don't say, "Oh, that's the end of Batman." You say, "Well, what's next for Batman?" That's kind of how I feel like about Millionaire Detective. It's like, "Oh, what's next for the Millionaire Detective and his nerdy friend Kato?" You know. So, um, yeah, it was fun. Nice voice work, especially by Mamoru Miyano, who is very underrated, I think, because he kind of gets typecast as a Bishonen type and singer, but he's actually a really good actor, as witnessed, that he did Tai Chi from Chihayafuru and the lead in Steins Gate in the same year. How many guys could do that? Rintaro and Tai Chi.
Wow.
That's the range this guy has. So he's really good, and I think he's really good in what could have been a thankless part, Kato. And I think he turns him into somebody really interesting and sympathetic. I always liked Kato better than Daisuke, to be honest with you, but it wasn't because Daisuke wasn't interesting. It's just because Daisuke is basically an asshole, but an interesting asshole. Anyway, so that's what we're watching this week. As I said, expect this to really, kick up a notch in a couple weeks because the new season will be starting, and I know we'll be watching a lot of stuff because I previewed 17 shows and I'll watch first episodes of even more than that. I don't think we'll talk about every show we watch, but we'll certainly talk about the ones that we find worth talking about. So is the podcast over? Of course not, because this is only the first step in a long journey of 1,000 miles, and we have many, many miles to go before we rest. And of course, it's been another busy week in Lake Wobegon, or I should say, another busy week in the world of anime.
The anime news.
So all I can say, Setsuken, is thank goodness we don't talk about real news on our show because we'd be here. Oh, it would be a depressing time, and we'd be here all day. Just the anime news certainly keeps us busy. Let's start with this is in fact our news segment. We've got a lot of news this week. Let me start off with, if you don't mind, I'll read the rankings from Oricon in Japan, the Japanese rankings, just so our fans can get an idea of what's popular here. And we'll start off with the weekly volume comic rankings. So this is individual volumes of manga. At number one was One Piece, 97. Then Kingdom, 59. Attack on Titan, 32. Those are all three massively popular manga. And Golden Kamui, number 23, came in at number 4. So good for Golden Kamui. We love Golden Kamui, as you know. By the way, One Piece, just for the record, that sold 1.25 million copies last week, whereas Kingdom in second place sold under 400,000. So when we're talking about One Piece and Kimetsu versus everything else, it's a pretty big gap.
The king is back.
Yeah, although Kimetsu is still king, and we'll talk about that. Although another topic. Spy X Family, by the way, came in fifth place. Ace of Diamond, I Will Borrow Her. I don't know that one. Einen no Shobotai Fire Force, My Hero Academia 28, but that's like its third week on the ranking. Then the last is Kako no Linen. Do you know this series, Kako no Linen?
I do not.
Never heard of it. By Miki Yoshikawa. I'll have to make a note to check that one. In fact, I'm literally writing on my notepad Kako no Linen so I can check that
Wait,
out later.
so Ace of Diamond is still going on? I thought it ended.
Oh God, it will never end. You kidding me? Eiji will be abused by the mangaka till the end of time.
Okay, yeah, it ended for me.
It ended for me. It ended for me, but it's yeah, no. Next, we have by comic work, which is the total volume sales by series, which I consider to be a really interesting category. But One Piece came in number 1, Kingdom Devil's Blade, or Kimetsu number 3, which, Devil's Blade Kimetsu has been finished for a couple months, so it's still number 3. Attack on Titan, and in Oshobotai, Spy X Family 6, My Hero Academia 7th, I Will Borrow Her, again coming in at 8. Golden Kamui coming in at number 9. And in 10th place, the soon-to-be premiering Haiku, which is also finished. So 10th place for Haiku is kind of a nice deal for them. Let's look at anime Blu-ray and see what's going on in the anime Blu-ray area. In anime Blu-ray, we have 22/7 Volume 6, which is an Idol series, right? Is that an Idol series? I think it is.
Oh, I would not know. I would not know any adult series.
Then Super HX Eros is at number 2. A3, number 3. Anna and the Snow Queen, which is not anime at all, as I noted before. Oh, no, that is, isn't it? Or is that Anna and the Snow Queen? No, that's Disney. Osamatsu-san Ultra Neat Box. I told you it was a big hit, Setsuken. Osamatsu-san Ultra Neat Box comes in at number 5. Neat, by the way, being the Neet spelling. Sword Art Online Alicization War comes in at number 6. Princess Connect Redive 7, Healing Good Precure 8, Fantasy Star Online 2 9, and Princess Connect 1 is at number 10. And then last, let's look at the anime Blu-ray or anime DVD and see if, as we often do, we get the more female-centric crowd here. That is definitely declining in over the years, that divide in Blu-ray and DVD by gender. 22/7 Volume 6, also number 1 on DVD. Anna and the Snow Queen, number 2 is again number 2. My Neighbor Totoro, as I told you, Ghibli never goes away, number 3. Pet 2, Super H Eros, Anime 227 Limited Edition, Fantasy Star Online 2, Anime A38. A lot of crossovers here. The Ultra Neat Box, number 9. And then Tenki no Ko, Weathering with You, Standard Edition comes in at number 10 from our friend Makoto Shinkai. So any general thoughts you want to chime in on the weekly rankings?
Yeah, I think I like the manga sales charts better. The anime stuff. The anime stuff, I was like, oh, oh,
Yeah,
oh, oh,
we're
oh.
painting a picture here, aren't we? And
Yeah, and I try not to paint that picture, but then reality just hits me in the face.
manga's this is friends. This is my message to you right now. Manga is killing it. No matter what you like, manga's got you covered. Manga is killing it right now. Anime's not.
Anime, you got to help me out here. I'm trying to defend your honor, and you're just
Yeah.
you're just bearing it all out there with what was it? What was the series? H Eros or whatever?
Yeah, H Eros 22/7.
Oh
Yeah, it's
no.
it is what it is. But let's talk about a couple of news stories here. The first one I want to talk about is because it was my manga recommendation corner a few weeks ago. Hitomo Takano's Watashi no Shonen manga is ending on October 26th. This is a story from Crystalline Hodgkins at Anime News Network. Uh, yeah, I love this manga. I'm disappointed to hear that it's ending so soon, and I think that pretty much eliminates any chance of it getting an anime. But who knows? Sometimes when series end, they get an anime when they end, so it's not totally impossible. This series has gotten a lot of accolades and some critical nominations and awards, and it's quite popular. So it's not impossible. I think anime is a little scared of the subject matter too. So anyway,
So, quick question
yeah,
on my boy. It was my boy, right?
yep, that's the English title. Yeah,
Okay. So about your boy,
yeah,
do you think have you been following it?
absolutely. Oh yeah. Within like a few chapters, I'm up to date.
Okay. So you think it's heading towards a conclusion, or is it one of those canceled things?
No, it's not canceled. There's no way it's canceled.
Okay.
It's. I mean, I wouldn't have necessarily said that it's going to. Oh, I can tell that it's about to end, but it also isn't a series that lends itself to uh, infinite. I think you could sort of see what her end game has been for a while. So I kind of have an idea where she's going with it. Um, it's there's no reason why it would have been canceled. It's like I said, it's quite popular. It's quite critically acclaimed. I think the subject matter may be why it's not getting an anime, but as far as the manga is concerned, that's past history. I don't think that has a factor. I just don't see any reason to think it would have been canceled. There's no reason to think that it would have. So that's disappointing for me, just because I love this series and I would love to see it continue. But that's fine. I hope she gives it a good ending. I'll let you know when it ends. I'll chime back in and let you know it was a good ending or it jumped the shark. I don't think she'll jump the shark. Let's talk about a big, big, big story here. This is from comicbook.com, Megan Peters. Demon Slayer, Kimetsu no Yaiba is now, I think, how many have ever done this? It's very few. Kochikame, JoJo, Slam Dunk, Dragon Ball, Bleach, Naruto, One Piece, and now Dragon Slayer have sold 100 million copies. Or in circulation, I should say. That's not necessarily sales because some of those are still on bookstore shelves, but they will sell. Kimetsu no Yaiba at only about 21 or 22 volumes, I think. 100 million copies in circulation. All I can say is to Gotuge Koyoharu, the mangaka, immense congratulations. I don't love your work. I don't dislike it. I don't love it. But my goodness, this is an amazing, amazing achievement. And every time I walked into a bookstore yesterday, and they had I often see this now. The first thing you see in the manga section, they have a big a big status board up at the front that shows you which copies they have in stock and which copies of Kimetsu they're sold out on. This is like the first thing you see in the manga section now. It did it only for a short time, and you can't say that it will ever obviously approach the longevity record of One Piece. But in terms of a short burst of like 1 year of sales, it dethroned One Piece from the top spot. It absolutely did. It achieved in 1 year what One Piece never achieved in 1 year. And that's something I wasn't sure I thought we would ever see. So Kimetsu, boy, I'll tell you. Also, on Kimetsu briefly, there's a short, like some kind of I think a little gag manga or spin-off manga that's going to be running for a few chapters too. That was just announced as well. So there you go, Kimetsu.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think for Oda, who was complaining that he didn't have any competition, or that, I think this was in an interview, he was jokingly saying that, he had reached the pinnacle and that there was no competition. Well, it seems like manga does have the potential to give him some competition every now and then. And I think One Piece itself is also ending in about 5 years. So I wonder what the manga, that's what he said. I wonder what the manga landscape is going to be now that Kimetsu is done and One Piece may be done in the next half decade or so.
Well, with no disrespect to Kimetsu, which achieved, like I said, maybe the greatest year in manga history commercially, it's a lot easier to see another Kimetsu springing up than another One Piece, because One Piece being on top of the heap for 20 years, basically, that's almost unimaginable. That will leave a big hole. I'm not personally a huge fan of it, but that will leave a big hole when it's gone. I will say I'll believe Oda when I see it. He may say that now, but and also it should be noted that Shueisha was kind of fudging the numbers, and everyone was kind of in Japan was kind of snarkily talking about how they were trying to fudge the numbers to make it look like Kimetsu wasn't beating One Piece, which I think reflects the revered status that Oda has in the manga world and indeed in Japanese culture. Basically, they were putting their thumb on the scale, concocting new categories and stuff, trying to make it look like Kimetsu wasn't beating One Piece, and then finally, I think they just gave up and said, "It's obvious. It's trouncing." So, I again, I feel this is a topic of potential discussion because I still don't know why this series. I don't know why this series is so immensely popular. I honestly just don't get it. Um, but it is what it is, and you got to take your hat off to Kimetsu no Yaiba. It's an absolutely incredible achievement. Absolutely incredible. 100 and now 100 million, and I think it'll reach 200 million at some point. I'm certain it will. In fact, um, I don't even know off the top of my head how many volumes One Piece has in circulation at this point, but it's got to be an ungodly number.
Yeah,
Um,
before we move on, I will say it might be the reason we don't, because I agree with you. The anime was really good and some of the animation was amazing, but the storytelling, while pretty darn good, was nothing to the level that I think the success it's achieved. So I think maybe my guess is we just haven't seen the parts of the manga that maybe captivated people, is my guess. Because it's one thing to, shoot up in sales after a successful anime series. It's another to stay there until you end, and then stay there even in the top three after you end. So I think maybe there's something special that happens later on in the story, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's a thing.
that's not my intuition, but it's possible. I don't know. Well, there'll be another season, and I've already committed that I'm going to give this show another shot when it comes back. And because if I can get past Inosuke and Zenitsu, I can at least watch it. And there are people that tell me that they're less prominent as the series
Yes.
goes on. So, I am going to give the anime another shot. But anyway, congratulations to Kimetsu. That's a huge achievement. I will say if I don't love the series, but I certainly, I don't resent it. It doesn't make me depressed that it's doing so well. I had nothing along those lines. So congrats on that. Next story. Fruits Basket. This is hardly news, but Fruits Basket just ended. And this is from Bleeding Cool by Adi Tantimade. I believe it's how it's pronounced. Adi, if I got that wrong, I apologize. Third and final season in 2021. Not really news. We knew this was coming. It's already been committed that this was going to get a complete retelling. But just for the record, it is coming next season. The second season, largely because of the material it covered, but also because of some editorial decisions which I wasn't thrilled with. Uh, kind of a snoozer for me, to be honest with you. But we kind of already discussed Fruits Basket, and I don't know if we want to get into another deep dive on Fruits Basket again. I feel like we kind of played that out. But do you have anything you want to add on Fruits Basket at this point?
Happy for the fans of the franchise.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're getting a full story and a Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood style retelling, because those are rare and we all want those for our franchises. So that's
Yep.
all. I won't watch it, but glad
Yep.
for you guys.
Yeah, and I will watch it, and I'll intermittently blog it. But there are other series I think are more deserving of that Full Metal Alchemist treatment than this one. But nevertheless, there's a lot of series. There are more series that are less deserving of it than there are more. Let's put it that way. Um, okay, another series we want to talk about is Seirei no Moribito, which is a regular contributor to our podcast. But our friend Alex Mateo at Anime News Network lets us know that High Dive is streaming the Moribito anime starting September 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, both in subbed and dubbed versions. High Dive, if you don't know, is available in pretty much the entire English speaking world or close to it, as well as parts of Europe like the Netherlands and Portugal and Spain, also South America, Central America, so Scandinavia. We've already talked a lot about Moribito. Everybody knows how much I love this series, but I just want to say great opportunity for people to watch this series who haven't watched it. It's streaming. You can do it subbed. You can do it dubbed. By God, watch it subbed. Please, I implore you. If you're going to watch Morbido, watch the subbed version. Nevertheless, it is available both ways. And it's gratifying for me, even now, 13 years after the fact, to see Moribito get both another Blu-ray license and a new streaming license in outside Japan. I think it's a testament to the fact that even though the series was not a commercial success, it has staying power because of its sheer brilliance. And this is a series that the people who know it can't let go of it because it is so great. It's so groundbreaking. It is such a legitimate piece of art. that even though it was not a commercial success, even now it keeps coming back. It keeps coming back, and to see it streamed again after all this time, I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah, for sure. Two things about this. A, this is good news and bad news. It's good news because obviously you can watch this series, and I've been planning on doing a rewatch with my brother, so that will happen, and maybe it'll be on a what we're watching later on. But the bad news about this is now I have to subscribe to High Dive again, and I that's another streaming service. But for people who are interested, so for people like me who watch stuff on their TV, the easiest way you can actually access High Dive, because I believe they don't have a TV or a PlayStation or an Xbox app, you can subscribe to VRV, which is Crunchyroll's Verve thing, and I believe they bundle Crunchyroll and High Dive in that. So that's a way you can access it and watch it on your TV. So uh, Verve, I believe, is a little bit more expensive than Crunchyroll month to month, but it bundles like Rooster Teeth and a bunch of other things as well. So that's probably what I'll do. I'll subscribe for a month or two to that, access High Dive that way, and then probably wait until the next big thing comes out that makes me want to subscribe to that again.
All right, thanks. Very, very useful, practical advice there. Thank you for sharing that. That's good info. Okay, so again, yay, Seirei no Moribito. May it live forever in the hearts of anime fans and find new ones. Next story. It's this is from My Anime List. Vinstat, My Anime List. Although again, the story is everywhere. Uzaki-chan wa Asobitai gets second anime season, and I just want to mention it because it's news. And also, Rent a Girlfriend was announced for second anime season. Uh, I think I just want to say I don't hate either of these shows, although I don't hate I dislike Ozaki-chan less of the two. In fact, I kind of almost like it, but not quite enough to have kept watching it after about 6 or 7 episodes when it really started to bore me. Whereas Rent a Girlfriend was like, ugh. But um, just another example, more examples of crap anime getting sequels and good anime not getting sequels. And again, nothing new there. That isn't news, but it is worth noting. It continues to happen. The crap shows almost always seemingly get sequels, and the good shows almost never do. So there you go. That's Anime 2020.
My suspicion with Uzaki is all the Twitter publicity it got, and it got significant publicity. Like, I would see YouTube videos about it from people who don't even cover anime. They just cover, like, the
Yeah.
gossip stuff. So I think that helped it as well. And it's telling that the announcement for Uzaki-chan came over Twitter, and then the news places picked it up and stuff. So, yeah. I also feel the same way about Uzaki-chan. I dropped it after 4 or 5 episodes. I was entertained. It just kind of fell off. It wasn't anything special. Rent a Girlfriend, I will say, for those of you who are curious about what it is and why it's potentially doing so well, a new writer over at Anime Evo wrote an article on it. So you can go read the story and kind of figure out why it might be jiving with the specific crowd. After reading that article, I was like, I'm still not very interested in this. And it's definitely not for me. But I think it'll give some explanations as to why it's seemingly doing well enough to get a second season.
Yeah. And as far as Uzaki-chan, I think it basically anytime a show can become a meme, it's in good shape. And that's basically what happened with that giant chest and Sugoi Dekai. It basically became a meme. And the show will do well on disc, I'm sure, when it goes on disc. I have no doubt that it will. So there you go. At least it has some scenes from Kobe in it, so not a total loss. Okay, now, well, I've been debating whether to tell this story last, but let's talk about it because it's a big one. Since we're talking about new series, the announcement came on Shingeki no Kyojin, Attack on Titan, which is going to premiere. We had a suspicion this was going to be the case, that it would be a late premiere like the last one was, but the final season will be premiering on December 7th. This is a story from, can you guess who this story is from, Setsuken?
My boy Raphael.
Yes, our third co-host, Rafael Antonio Pineda at ANN, Anime News Network. I want to say this is map up, by the way, so we know there's been a studio change, and the preview is out there for those of you who would like to watch it and compare. I didn't find it particularly stunningly different, but I never thought this series was that great visually anyway by wit standards. But anyway, so the new final season will be premiering on December 7th, which I find amusing and ironic that they chose that particular date, December 7th, because in the words of the great Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a day that will live in infamy, there are some connotations for the material in the final season of Shingeki, which were kind of unveiled at the end of the last season, which are very much related to that time period in history. As we were doing the Oricon rankings, you definitely distinctly heard Attack on Titan's name mentioned prominently because it remains immensely popular. And the anime, they did wait too long to come out with the second season of the anime and lost perhaps some of the sensation. But it went from being a sensation to just being a big hit, which I think is kind of where it has settled since then. There were people for a while who thought that Shingeki would be the series to challenge One Piece, and that never happened. Nevertheless, it did remain a huge hit, and is a huge hit, and will remain a huge hit until it breathes its last breath, if it ever does. These things are hard to kill. But what? So you've watched it all the way through, have you not, Setsuken? Attack on Titan?
The anime, yes. The
Okay.
anime, yes. And I actually do like it quite a bit. Um even with some of the stuff from the last season, I don't follow the mangaka on Twitter. I don't know what he's talked about before, but from the anime, I think he's being vague enough where I'm not uncomfortable with anything he's depicting. And
Okay.
my interpretation, I suspect, might be a little different from yours. So I think that might be worth it. Is at some point, are you going to watch the final season?
Oh, I will, and I appreciate a lot of what the series does in terms of grand spectacle and kind of absurdism. I think it is almost brilliant in a way,
Yes.
and I have always appreciated that about it. I also happen to think Armin is a great character. I think it's a series of terrible characters with one great character, which I find is odd. That's very rare. But I think it's a series of generally terrible characters, which has always been his weakness, with one great character who's Armin. And I hope he has a prominent role in the final season. I have no idea whether he does or not. I've always kind of felt that the mangaka hated Armin, but that's kind of just my own personal spin on it. Uh, Whether that's true or not, I have no idea. And yes, there have been kind of off the field, as we say in the sports metaphor world, off the field incidents with this mangaka and his assistants related to some rather unpleasant views on World War II and on foreigners and things like that. So there is fire where that smoke is. Um, the question you alluded to, whether it makes you uncomfortable, it makes me uncomfortable. I do think he crosses a line and gets a little too, he cuts a little too close to the bone here, and it does make me uncomfortable. And I have read past where the anime is, and I kind of know what's coming to an extent. And let me just say, for the record, within the people who read the manga, there is a broad disagreement between those who feel that he's espousing certain views and those who feel that he's not. And I think that's a legitimate disagreement. One can read this material and interpret it either way. I'm kind of uncomfortable with the fact that even that's the case, but I definitely interpret it in the way that he holds some views, and more troubling is the way he expresses those views that I personally find to be a little repugnant. But at the same time, I have a very difficult decision to make because I've blogged this series for 3 seasons. And as a blogger, you do have to take into account what do your readers want to see. And there's no question that whatever you feel about it, the interest level in Attack on Titan is among the highest of any anime out there. So if I'm going to not blog this series, I better be damn well sure of myself in not doing it because there's a high level of interest in this. Um, and it's not Blood Sea or something where it's just awful. It's not awful. It's always interesting, and but it goes to some rough places, and I know that if I cover it, the discussion is going to get nasty and angry because the people on the opposing side, frankly, are that their default response when people espouse the interpretation I do is to get nasty and personal and frankly often a little bit racist. So it's troubling. It's going to be a troubling show to cover if I decide to cover it. But on some level, I feel like I would be abdicating my responsibility as an anime critic if I don't. So I haven't yet decided what I'm going to do with it, which is one of the reasons why, despite the fact that I do find this series interesting and entertaining, when I finally saw the date come up, uh, after I stopped laughing that it was December 7th, I was like, oh God, I've been dreading this announcement. And that's the reason why, because now I have to make that decision, which I even felt like going into the last season, it was almost a decision I had to make. Going into this season is an even tougher decision.
So I definitely think you should cover it because I am going to probably hold the opposing viewpoint just because I don't have that extra context that maybe you do. And I think I might even be biased, I would say, against that specific viewpoint that you're mentioning. Maybe because I like the series, or maybe because I just enjoy it, or maybe because I have a tendency to disassociate and filter out some of the discomforting stuff. I've done that with a lot of series, and I don't know if it's good or not. People can write in and talk about it. I think it's a larger discussion we want to have one day, but I do think you should write it. And I have not covered the other seasons. I think I might do it for this final one because I missed out on covering the first season and I regretted that. But then I was like, I don't know if I want to cover the other seasons because I feel like a poser because I never covered the other ones. But I definitely think for this final season, I'll have a interesting viewpoint that'll be different from some of the other ones. And so it'll be interesting if we're both covering it and we have opposing viewpoints. And I think that might create some balance in the force. But I definitely want you to cover it, even if you just turn off the comments for that post.
Oh
I
God.
would want to, as a fan of your writing, I would not want you to skip on it.
That's what I call the nuclear option, turning off the comments. That's boy, things have to be really rough to get to that point. And I find that what usually happens, I've only done it once or twice in all my time blogging, is they'll then go into some other post and leave the comment there, just to piss you off. Maybe I'll let you cover it and I'll issue comments on your posts. Maybe that's how we'll do it. I'll let you pick up the mantle. uh, but I don't know. It's easy. It's easy for you to say, "Oh, you should cover it, Enzo. You should cover it." Well, but I'm leaning in that direction. I'll absolutely 100% cover the first episode, and I think what's going to happen, honestly, is I'll see how I feel after that episode, and if I feel like going on, I'll go on, and if I feel just like I need a shower and to wash myself off of this show forever, I won't. But I will absolutely 100% commit. I will cover the first episode and I'll 100% commit. I will watch it and do a review post at the end. For everything that happens in between, that's TBD.
Yeah, and we've got what you're watching, so that's
Yeah.
always a safe space here.
Yeah. Okay. Last story is I want to talk about. We have another series announcement. This is not as big a deal, as if anything could be as big a deal. But we want to talk about Anytime Bones has a new series. We want to talk about it, a new Bones original series, especially. And this one is this particular story is from Anime News Network by Crystalline Hodgkins. Again, thank you, Miss Hodgkins. This is from Hiroko Utsumi, who did Banana Fish and Free. You may be noticing a theme here. And the other free stuff. They're doing a new series called Skate, and the 8 is the number 8, as in Skater Boy. And it's a skateboarding anime. So there you go. Ichiro Okuchi, who's another fairly big name in anime circles. He's the writer of Code Geass and Cabaneri of the Iron Fortress. So he's a big name too. Um, it's bones. It'll look good. I'm not a huge fan of Banana Fish or Free, and I'm not a huge fan of Code Geass, although I know you are, or Cabaneri, which I kind of thought had like 3 good episodes and totally jumped the shark. Nevertheless, could be interesting. The more interesting topic for me on this is how did it take anime so long to come out with a skateboarding anime? Because I can't think of another skateboarding anime off the top of my head. I mean, there are shows that have had skateboards in them, but not like a full on skateboarding anime. And you'd think that that's something trendy enough that anime would have hit that by now, but I don't think they ever have. So why do you think it took anime so long to come out with a skateboarding episode?
I'm not sure. Is skateboarding like a huge thing in Japan?
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, it is. It is.
Okay, okay. Because I know there's a bit of a resurgence happening in the US. The Tony Hawk video games just came out with a remaster, and a lot of people are excited about that. And I think some of that energy is seeping into popular culture. So I don't know if there's something happening in that subculture right now, skateboarding itself, where both this anime and that video game and a lot of that other stuff is starting to pop up and creep up.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it ever went away. I think it's always been popular. I'm just surprised it's taken this long. But like I said, anytime there's a new Bones anime, especially an original, I think we have to take note of it. And so there it is. Skate with an 8 is going to be the new series from Bones. We don't know when, but it's coming up in 2021 sometime. Duh.
Can
Yeah,
I say that I don't like the 8 in the title? It just drives me a little insane.
that's the lingo though. That's skateboarder lingo. I mean
Oh,
that.
Guardian Enzo, are you hip with the kids? Is
Well,
that what
I
it
know
is?
I'm not, but I'm in touch enough to know that. That's skater boy. That's the lingo. So it's clear who they're going after here. And again, that just makes it all the more kind of strange to me that they haven't done it. No one has done this before now. But anyway, there you go. So look for that sometime in 21. Maybe probably not winter. I'm going to guess spring, but when it comes out, it'll be on our season preview episode for that season. You can bank on that. And that, folks, is another busy week in No, I'm sorry, another busy week in anime news. And another busy week for Notaku and for Setsuken and Enzo because even after all that news, we're still not done.
Topic of the week.
Okay, dear listeners, and when I say dear listeners, I do mean dear listeners. This is how dear you are to us. We're making you the topic of the week. We didn't do listener questions last time because it was our season preview post, and we had a great topic of the week lined up, and we'll get to it. But the thing is, we had so many good questions, we just decided we're going to give the whole damn topic of the week segment to your questions for us. So please buckle in and get your popcorn and enjoy a full on explosion of listener questions. Let's start with one of my LIA folks, Red, who says, I can't help but smile and nod along as I listen to your discussions, especially on the topic of the week about gatekeepers and adding movies and TV to series discussions in the mix. As always, in the series franchise that sells the most were Kimetsu no Yaiba was at the top. Was that Comic Works Comic Walk? No, in fact, it was Oricon, like I said. But his actual question is, what do you think is the series that influenced you the most to have a more discerning eye in watching and critiquing anime in manga? So, Setsukin, what do you think?
Oh, this is an interesting question. For me, I think it actually was Code Geass. Code Geass. I mean, as a young wee lad, one of the things I did in recess at school with a lot of my friends is we would talk about anime and video games and TV shows, and um, we've been discussing things from a very young age. But I think it was Code Geass, and at that point, the internet getting a little bit excited about it, and it had all those cliffhangers and stuff like that. And it was around that point that I started to actually write about anime. And then also, because I've been writing about games at a much more younger age. And that kind of propelled me into blogging. And then I got more serious about it as time went on. What about you?
Well, it's funny because it's a series that I watched before I started blogging, but I think it was Seirei no Moribito because that was the one that really got me looking at anime in a more critical way. I think it would be fair to say. Um, and once I started blogging, it was actually several years into my blogging career, but Shinsekai Yori was another one that really influenced me because it's such an intellectually dense and deep series, A, and B, it I ranked it as I think number 6 in my top 10 series of the 2010s, a wonderful series, but in all the shows in that top 10, it was by far the most flawed. So it really gave you a lot of things to think about and write about as a critic because of how high and low it was. And then another couple I'd throw a mention to were Watamote because I recognized a lot of coded language that the author was using. And for people who had family or friends who were in the same kind of psychological situation, I think that was very recognizable. That was an interesting one to look at as a personal series. And then Oremo, for some of the reasons we've already discussed, as I realized kind of over the course of that series, and especially in the aftermath, what a sucker I was for not seeing it for what it was right away. Um, so those would be the ones I would mention.
Yeah, and since you mentioned what leveled me up as a writer, I think was the series that comes to mind is Anohi Mita Hana no
Mm.
Namae Boku Tachi wa Mada Shiranai, which I'm still proud I remember that long title. But that show was the one where I think I started to predict things and I started to break down a show and what it was about, what it was trying to say. And before that show, I was just like, oh, this episode was really good. I really like this. I really like that. And I think once I covered that series, I was kind of forced to, because it was very slow at the start. And so a lot of it was like, okay, what is this series about? And ever since that, I think I've been always looking at anime with the intention of seeing what it's trying to say or what it's trying to do. And I think if you're an aspiring writer or a critic, that I think is really important is to try and dissect something and try to understand what it's trying to do. And maybe it's not trying to do anything, which is also something like what I think Charlotte, if you ever watched that show, that was a show that just had no idea what it was trying to
Yeah,
do.
I watched and dropped it. I vaguely remember it. It was a PA Works, if I'm not mistaken. Charlotte, was it a PA Works show? I don't remember.
Yep, yep, yep. It was a
Yeah, yeah,
PA
yeah,
work
yeah.
show.
Kind of a disaster, actually. Yeah. Okay. So very good. And thank you, Red. Next, another RLIA person, and Riv on LA says, first of all, thanks for another great podcast. You're welcome. I'm glad Yona of the Dawn got a shout out. I picked up the manga after watching the series and loving the direction it's going, especially how the mangaka chose to handle Suwon and his actions. And all I can say is, Riv, I agree with you 1,000%. The manga is fantastic, and Suwon is an incredibly fascinating character. The question from Riv is I enjoy anime series set in past eras of Japan, but the majority I've countered have had a samurai theme. So I'm curious as to what you think are the most neglected periods in Japanese history that you would like to see more anime set in. And so for me, I'll go first this time. The main one for me is the Genpei War, which is the war between the Heike and the Minamoto clan in the 11th century, which is really in many ways the defining event in Japanese history. There's a very famous Japanese historical work on this written in the interview just in the shortly after the events. Actually really started out as a vocal, as a story that was handed down from storyteller to storyteller, eventually found its way to the page. It's called Tale of the Heike Monogatari. And it's an incredibly interesting and sad and powerful period of Japanese history. And yet almost there was a manga about it, but there's been almost no anime or even manga about that. And it's considering it's in many ways the seminal event in modern Japanese history, that strikes me as being a an omission. Which I'd love to see corrected. And then also the other one is the 60s, because the 60s, people don't realize it wasn't only in America and even Europe where there was a lot of social unrest and student protests, that was happening in Japan too. And Japan was not a country that was used to social unrest or student protests. So this was a big upheaval in this country. And they're really, understandably, the Japanese tendency towards uncomfortable things in their history is to pretend they never happened. So you don't see this get a lot of attention in manga or especially anime. Murakami has referenced it in his novels, and he lived through it as a student at the time. But there's Concrete Revolutio, if you remember Concrete Revolutio, definitely alludes to this era in Japanese history almost directly. I mean, it's couched in fantasy, science fiction, but it's basically that's what it is. But very few other anime that I can remember have ever broached it. So those would be the two time periods that I would point to.
Yes. I when I saw this question a week or two ago, I think now, or it was whenever I saw it. I actually racked my brain for a while, and then I went on a Google spree to try to figure out if there was a lot of historical period anime in Japan that didn't have samurai, and I wasn't able to find many of them. The only one that I think I found that was of a slightly historical era was the 1955 the Rainbow series. What was it called?
I remember that.
Rainbow Nisha Roko no Shinjin, something like that.
The kids in the Reform Institute.
Yeah. Yep. That one. So I really liked that one, and I think that's a good one. But it's not like historical. It's not like feudal Japan, if
Right.
that's what you're looking for. So that the reason that came to mind for me was because you mentioned, that time period of the student protests and stuff like that, and it's not necessarily in that time period, but it's close enough, I think, vibe wise. So that was the only thing I could think of. I mean, Gintama is technically historical, but it's historical and it's sci-fi, and it's this weird mishmash where they take like this really feudal era of Japan, but then they mishmash it with like sci-fi and aliens. So there's pieces of it there, but I mean beyond that, there's not too much. And then I think the Rakugo show Genro Rakugo also
good call.
was that was the only other one that I could think of that was kind of historical ish. And that one just for if you're interested in Japanese culture as a whole and the whole Rakugo thing, it's a fantastic series to look at. But I will hand it to you, Riv, sir. You have found something very, very much that is an issue, and I think we need to have more stories that explore different time periods because history is very rich and ripe for exploration in that end. So yeah, sorry, there's nothing big there, but I wish there was.
Yeah, and it is a subject I have thought about a little bit. So, because of The Tale of the Haiku is one of my favorite books, and I would love to see. And the other part of Riv's also asked for recommendations, which you've already kind of covered. I would throw a couple out there. One of them would be, since you mentioned the 50s, Showa Monogatari is also set in the 50s, and it's a much more romanticized kind of slice of lifey take on it than Rainbow, which is very gritty and dark, but it's nevertheless kind of interesting as a historical document. There's also Angel Moi, Record of Mongol Invasion, which, while it does have samurai in it, they're very, very early samurai, and it's more about the invasion, and it's more of a straight up military thing. And that Mongol invasion of Japan is another one of Japan's historical events seminally, and there has not been a lot about it in anime. So that would be another one I would mention. That's a recommendation for a less covered time period. And lastly, I would say Kitsutsuki Tante Dekoro, which just finished last season, The Woodpecker Detective's Office, which is set in the like 1920s, which is not, again, it's not a historical era that you see represented a ton in anime. So that would be another one that I would say is a recommendation on my part. So great question, Riv. Let's jump now to Princess Usagi from LIA, who says, thank you so much for the podcast. You guys always have engaging conversations. I'm new to manga, not familiar with all the works out there, so I love your manga recommendations. Thank you. I've started reading Boku no Kokoro no Yabayatsu and Yokohama Kaidashi Kiko, and they are both really interesting. Yes, I agree. Both fantastic series. Bokuyaba just getting better and better, by the way. I was wondering if you know how it is decided what the English titles of anime should be. I've noticed that sometimes the English title is very different from what the Japanese title actually says. For example, the upcoming anime Tonkaku Kawaii has the English title Fly Me to the Moon, which has nothing to do with the Japanese title. And yes, that's absolutely true, Your Highness. That is, we do often see this in localization. They will come up with uh, completely different completely different titles that have nothing to do with the Japanese title, which generally bothers me when it happens. Although, like for example, Boku Daki ga Anaimachi, the town where only I am missing, they localize that to Erased, which I just hate, 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 hate. It's a great title, and I don't think they should have changed it. Um, but and then another one is Sayonara miniskirt, which there's endless examples of this. So
Yeah.
I asked our friend Jake, who is a translator and has to make these decisions often. In fact, although the title is not always the decision is in his hands, but I asked him to weigh in on this, and he basically said the original creator has the final say. But if the title they come up with is not something that works in English, the U.S. licensor can come back to them and try to get something different, and so there can be a little back and forth there. Um, the senior people in the U.S. licensor are the ones who can go to the Japanese. The Japanese publisher is the one who will say, this is what we think the English title will be. Then the English licensor can say, you know what, this isn't quite right in English. Can we change it? Sometimes it's changed. Sometimes it isn't. And he says he himself as a translator can sometimes have some input on this, but not most of the time. And the last thing Jake says, sometimes the literal translation works, but sometimes a lot of the LN titles, especially, just don't work when they're translated literally, and you have to come up with something different. And I think Yahari, which we talked about earlier in the podcast, is a good example.
Oh, I want to go off about that for a
Yeah.
second.
So that's anyway. Thank you sincerely to our good friend Jake for weighing in on this and with some insider perspective. And what are your thoughts on this, Setsuken?
Yeah, so this is a thing with me. If you want to say a pet peeve that drives me up the wall and then has me become like, I don't know, some kind of weird wall creature that just like hisses at everything, this is that thing. I hate it when. So my perspective on this is this, because I don't know so much about anime, but in video games, I know that a lot of this is marketing driven, and I'm talking specifically about Japanese games that are localized in the West. So I'm assuming. So one thing I will say is, anime has it a lot better. There are people like Jake and Sentai Filmworks, and even some of the people at Funimation. There's a lot of passion that goes into the translation thing that you don't get in a lot of other things like video games, for example. I remember when I was at a panel at a convention, and there was this translator for, I believe she worked for Nintendo. And one of the things that like drove me up the wall was the fact that she said, translators have this really interesting job where we have to translate Japanese, which sounds like a caveman speaking, into English. And so there is that high and mighty attitude to that as well. So I'm glad that anime doesn't have that, or at least I've never heard somebody at a convention say stuff like that. But to that end, my big guess, and I think it's a pretty solid guess, is that it's marketing driven. They feel like they can market Snafu, which is what they called Yahari here, which drove me up the wall. Snafu, my teen comedy Snafu, which has nothing to do with the title in Japan. They felt like that could be marketed better. So it's just marketing. It's what they think will do well and be popular. And whoever the marketing executive is for that series, or whoever's managing that, that was their idea of, okay, yeah, this is a title that will go with the West. So that's my take on it.
And I will say, Japanese marketing people are often not the best people who really should be judging what will work in the West in English and what won't. I'll just leave it at that. Okay, so thank you very much, Your Highness Princess Usagi Hime-san. That was Hime-sama. That was a very interesting question. Next from Jan, another one of our regulars at LIA. Do you guys have jobs related to anime or writing at all? How do you manage your time in order to put out consistent, high quality content? Well, first of all, both of us have full time jobs that are not related to anime. And I think this could be again, this could be a deep dive topic, but um, yeah. How do you manage your time? I can say honestly, those of you who follow me know I have a Patreon, and I have an Amazon link through my website, and I have a couple of unobtrusive ads, and I have a PayPal account where you can go in and do do a subscription. So I have ways of at least defraying my costs, and I appreciate sincerely all the help that the listeners who or the readers at LIA give me on that. But the truth of the matter is, I put in way too much time on this for what I get out of it. That's just reality. I know that if it wasn't a labor of love, I wouldn't do it. But how do you manage your time? Well, frankly, it's easier now because there's a lot less good anime than there was 5 years ago. So as far as at least as far as the website is concerned, it's a lot easier than it used to be. Although it's still a website running a website, and again, love RC. In Anime Evo. They're great websites, and you're definitely the main dude at Anime Evo, but you do have a staff, and RC has a staff. At LIA, it's just me. So everything that happens on that website is me, and so there have been times in the last decade where it has consumed way, way, way too much of my time. But it's hard for me to walk away from it because it's such a big part of my identity now. And as I said, if it wasn't a labor of love, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, for sure. For me, I think the one thing that comes to mind from this question is goko, which is a Japanese word for playing, right? So I that's what I feel like. I'm website gokoing, or I don't know how else you would say that when you mesh English and Japanese like that. But a lot of the things that I've done have felt like I am playing at being something, playing at being a reviewer, playing at being a podcaster, even to some extent. And that's how I start out with things. And then the playing turns into something a lot more serious because I tend to have a perfectionist streak and I try to get as good at something as I can. So I literally started an anime reviews website, an anime content website, honestly. That's what Anime was started as. And then it became something much bigger. Same thing with like, oh, let's try to do a YouTube channel. Let's try to do a podcast. So that's the first end of it. As for making money about writing for anime or covering anime, I think that's just challenging, and it's really challenging right now because the general audience is moving away from print media and going towards video and YouTube and all these other things. So, and I think we're even an example of moving with the times, right? Because we're doing a podcast now instead of focusing on our writing. So, honestly, it's really hard to make money talking about anime than it is, say, about TV, movies, or video games, I would say, especially. But as to whether I've had a job related to it, not really. The closest I've gotten is writing for the occasional magazine in my college years and getting paid for it. But other than that, I choose to keep this as a hobby because I like doing things the way I like doing them. And a lot of the times when you go work for an organization. And Guardian Enzo, you've worked for My Anime List
Yes.
as a contributor, so you maybe have more insight into this. But there's certain approaches to doing things, and they have requirements. It's word limits. It's how they want you to talk about certain things, and I hate that stuff, which is why I do it as a hobby. I don't want this to become something where I'm working 9 to 5 writing reviews for anime. That would kill all the fun out of it for me.
Yeah, I did, and and I totally attest to the fact that there are frustrations in being a writing job, working for someone else, and dealing with their restrictions, dealing with their editors. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Well, I have to say, if I could make a living doing this, I would gladly do it. Because this is my passion in life. I have many passions, but this is among the most passionate. And I actually would love to be able to support myself doing this. I think it would be wonderful. But for many of the reasons that Setsuken states, it's hard thing to do, and it's hard thing to do without kind of making it once getting there and then having the well be poisoned so much that it no longer is a well you want to drink from. If you follow my analogy there. So great question, and maybe not the last time we'll talk about that. I don't know. It's an interesting topic. Though there is one more thing Jan asks, which is, did you have a turning point series where you sort of that kind of leveled up your interest in anime as a medium and think, hey, this is more than I realized it was? And Jan mentions Last Exile. And that would be one of the ones for me too, actually, Last Exile, because when I saw Last Exile for the first time, I was pretty blown away just by how beautiful it was and how interesting the story was and how fucked up an ending could be. So yeah, Last Exile would be on my list. Princess Mononoke Hime. When I saw that in the theater, mind blown. Outlaw Star, seeing that on American TV, just loving the story, loving the how cool and unwestern it was. And then probably Evangelion, just from a sheer critical standpoint of what a mind blowing, really intellectually dense show could be, and Fooly Cooly for just being basically a perfect anime in every way. Cool and incredible music, and just basically it's a short, so you can't compare it to a 26 episode show, but Fooly Cooly is for me the most perfect self-contained anime ever made, even if it's only 6 episodes long. So those would be the ones for me.
Yeah, for me, just really quickly, I think Card Captor Sakura was one that definitely leveled up my interest as when I was younger. And then I think it was Hellsing and Naruto that got me serious about anime. And those were the first two anime I downloaded and saw back in the fan sub days. So Hellsing, for how like graphic and adult it felt like at the time, and that was like the 90s was just that was the thing. 90s, early 2000s, late 90s. So that was definitely a thing. And then I checked out Ghost in the Shell, didn't like the movies that much, loved the series, and kind of went from there. So for me, before I watched those kinds of shows, the only thing I had seen in anime was honestly Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh and Dragon Ball Z. And we'll talk about my dislike of Dragon Ball Z someday, but I think it's something that is a little overrated, I think. And Naruto is probably too. So anyway, before I get all the DBZ fans,
I was gonna say, address your hate mail to.
yeah, yeah. Don't worry. My best friend from when I was a young lad till now, he was a vehement DBZ fan. So he even almost like stopped being my friend when we were younger because I didn't like Dragon Ball Z. So I've dealt with that my entire life, guys. So yeah, I hear the anger on that and all that other stuff. But yeah, those were the series, Housing and Naruto, I would say.
All right, awesome. One last question then from our good friend Monsieur Bleu Bleu, who would like to know specifically, do we have a favorite opening song from anime from over the last year, fall 2019 through summer 2020, specifically the song, not the animated sequence? So what do you think, Setsuken? Do you have one that springs to mind for you?
Yes, before I answer that, I he did say why we don't talk about or something along the lines. I feel like I think there was at least a subtle question in there of why we don't talk about anime music that much, and I do want to talk about why I don't do it
Okay.
because as far as music goes, I'm the most tone deaf person you can imagine. Like music is the one thing. I've worked on video games, I've written stuff, I've done animatics, I've done 3D animations, but if you call music into it, my friends have told me that I just have the weirdest taste in stuff. So actually, a lot of the music that I listen to is Japanese music. J rock is probably my thing of choice. So in the last year, I mean, I don't know, take the Shokugeki no Soma openings; those were really good. Any music like that, something from Radwimps, Uberworld used to be my favorite band of all time. So honestly, anything J Rock, I'll probably like it unless it's like super off kilter. But
Mm.
yeah, the reason I don't talk about it is because I don't feel comfortable talking about music as an authority. But I love anime opening songs and ending songs. And I am one of those people. I don't know if you are, Guardian Enzo. I never skip them unless they're like terrible.
I skip them sometimes. Once I've watched them a few times and I've decided whether I really like it or not. If I really like an opening song or an ending song, I never skip it. But if I'm indifferent about it, I have no qualms about skipping it. That's just me. And I'm no expert on music by any means, although I do love music and listen to it religiously. So I notice it for sure. I guess the reason I don't talk about it more is because music is rarely a deal breaker for me. With an anime one way or the other, and OPs and EDs. So when the deep dives that we take, they rarely come into conversation. Background music, which actually you have heard us talk about a few times, is actually more something we talk about. And talking about something like Shinsekai Yori or Seirei no Moribita, how important the background music is for a show like that. I don't have one that just absolutely jumps out to me as like over the last year that the song itself. I will say you did specifically Blue Blue say opening, but I assume endings are also an option. I'll say Great Pretender, Freddie Mercury doing his incredible cover of that as the ending theme to Great Pretender, which also has a great animation sequence along with it, by the way. That would probably be the one that jumps out for me, both because it's a great version of a great song, but also because it so totally fits with the material. But I would also call it the opening for Great Pretender, which is like a perfect mishmash send up of like 70s and 80s Hollywood caper movies. Insanely clever, really good. So both the OP and ED from Great Pretender come to mind for me. They're fantastic, but you can't. You said specifically the song and not the animation, and I get it. It's a valid question, but for me, it's hard to divorce the song from the sequence because they in a really good anime with a really good director, they'll be inexorably linked, if you know what I'm saying. And in
Yes.
Great Pretender is a perfect example of that. And in fact, I'm still convinced, and I haven't watched the last 8 episodes, but I'm still convinced that there's a lot of symbolism in the ending theme from Great Pretender with the animation that's revealing about how it's going to end. I guess I'm going to find out as I watch those episodes.
Before we move on, the last thing I'll say is Blue Blue and Jan. Fantastic questions. You were the two guys I was talking about when I said I want to do topic of the weeks on this. So I do at some point, Guardian Enzo, want to talk about what makes a good opening and what makes a good ending, song, theme, animation. So this is definitely something we'll go back to.
Awesome. Yeah, I think so too. All right, guys. And that wraps up this week's segment of listener questions, but keep them coming. We love them. Keep them coming in and we'll keep. And if we have to go to industry people to search out answers, I'm prepared to do the legwork to try to make that happen if I can. Absolutely. Because I think that's really interesting to get more perspectives on it. Okay. Thank you very much. But we're not quite done yet. It's time for what may very well be my favorite segment of the podcast, which is the manga recommendation corner. And I've gotten some nice messages from people saying that they picked up the manga. Some of those I've read on the air that I recommended, so that feels great whenever that happens. So rather than one manga, I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to recommend two this time. And it's because this is an author, a mangaka named Tajima Reto, who has written two manga. She's currently on her second manga. And they're both, well, one of them is still ongoing, but they're both relatively short. So I feel okay in recommending them both here. The first of her manga is called Kodomo wa Wakate Agenai. And this was nominated for a manga taisho, and it was made into a film, actually, a live action film. And I guess she's considered to be seinen. So we do see more and more female seinen writers these days, which is kind of interesting. And unfortunately, this one is not licensed in English. It's only licensed in French that I'm aware of. But basically, this is a story. Kodomo wa Wakate Agenai is a story of two kids in high school. One of them is a calligraphy his family runs a calligraphy studio, very traditional, and he's of course wonderful at calligraphy, but interested in other things. And then there's a girl who's kind of a tomboy, and she has some family related stuff. And it's only 2 volumes. It's very short. It won't take you long to read it. 20 chapters, 20 monthly manga chapters, but it's really a wonderful short series. As I say, nominated for a Taisho, made into a live action film. Because this particular mangaka, she has a really quirky, funny, interesting sense of humor. And she also talks about some really interesting topics, and she gets into transgender issues and all kinds of interesting stuff that she does in her manga. So this is like an appetizer, really. You can blow through this one in a couple days, but it's really wonderful. Kodomo wa Wakate Agenai. And then her current series, which was just nominated for, boy, I forget which award it was nominated for, but it was nominated for an award recently. This one is called Mizu wa Umi ni Mukate Nagareru. And this one, a water flowing into the sea, actually, that's what this one is called. And this one is also in a Seinen magazine, Beisatsu Shonen. Oh, actually, Beisatsu Shonen, interesting. So this one is considered a shonen, even though to me, tonally, it's very much the same as the first one. Oh yeah, this one was nominated for a Manga Taisho as well. In fact, placed fifth place, and also won the Osamu Tezuka Cultural Prize in the New Creator category, which is wonderful. So again, really well respected, well regarded young mangaka. This one is in its third volume, ongoing, and it's called in English "Water Flowing to the Sea" is how this was translated. Although again, it's only licensed in France, sadly. But maybe someday English will get with the wagon on this. This one is about a kid who goes to live with his uncle, who is a mangaka himself, out in kind of a countryside Inaka place. And he has a big house, and he has several people rooming with him, and there are some weird things connecting this high school student with one of the tenants in the house. And all of the tenants in the house are kind of weird, quirky, interesting people, and the uncle himself is kind of a weird, quirky, interesting person. And the protagonists in the other series too, the protagonists in all of her series, really likable, really interesting, both the boys and the girls. uh, Again, weird, quirky sense of humor, really kind of beguiling storybook art style, almost watercolor art style. Really just a wonderful mangaka who's quirky and fun and subtle, with a really affection for characters and interesting takes on humanity. Again, we have some interesting gender issues that come to play in this. It's not the theme of the series, but they come into play with the supporting characters. So Mizu wa Umi ni Mukate Nagareru, again, like her first series, nominated in the Manga Taisho, nominated in the Manga Gasugoi Awards, and this one won the Tezuka Sama Cultural Prize for the new creators. So both these series highly recommended. Setsuken, have you had a chance to scan either one of these?
No, I have not seen either of these. I think this would, looking at the art style for this, I think it would be really nice as like a short. Even though I think the manga's way too big for that, but it'd be nice to do an OVA or a short or something like that. And looking through like art style and the vibe of some of this stuff, I want to see it animated. I think because it's so small, that might not be possible. Also, I have to say, Blue is probably the only one who can read this out of the people I know. So that's also difficult. But yeah, look, both of them look really good. I'm definitely more interested in Mizu wa Umi ni Mukate Nageraru,
Mm.
which has that whole like, I just really like something about high schooler going into this apartment and or this house and meeting all these like quirky characters. That's right up my alley. So I might go and read up on that one if I can get my hands on it.
Yeah, I think of the two series, that one is probably the more anime friendly in terms of theme. It does sort of lend itself that, like you said, that is a very kind of an anime friendly premise. But both the series, I would rank them equally. Actually, I think they're both equally great. And I think an OVA would work for Kodomo wa Wakate Agenai because at 20 chapters, a 3 episode OVA series. Don't forget, like I said, they made a live action movie out of this that was probably about 100-minute running length. So yeah, you could do an OVA for that series for sure. As far as reading it in English, well, we don't go down that road. But you guys are none of you are children. So, well, maybe some of you are, but even so, you're probably. So you make your own decisions in life. That's all I'll say about that. But these are importable. If you want to support the author, and you talked about this before, if you want to support the author, you have the chance to do that. These are importable. Can always do that. And get on the horn with your friendly licensor of choice and say, hey, this is a young mangaka who's highly regarded and gotten all kinds of awards and stuff. Uh, why don't you think about licensing this? I bet people would read it. And I think I'm not saying that these would be Kimetsu no Yaiba or One Piece, but I think these are series that would find an audience because I look at as in many as often is the case with me, I get drawn to a manga. This is how I get drawn to it. If it's a weekly Shonen Jump title or if it's a mangaka I know or whatever, obviously that's different. But manga I don't know. Often how I get drawn into them is by the cover because I walk through shops in Japan. I walk through bookshops in Japan, which is one of my favorite things to do. And I look at the covers of all the manga that they haven't faced out, and the artwork on a cover strikes me, and I say, okay, that's interesting because not only is it pretty, but the artwork itself tells me a story. And that's how I feel when I look at the covers of Tajimi Reto's manga. I was like, oh, wow, I feel like I know those characters just from looking at that cover. And I think that a good cover in a manga can do that. It can tell you a story as well as looking pretty. And I think that's the case with her. I love the artwork. It's really beguiling, as I say, almost a E. E. Shepherd, Winnie the Pooh kind of a thing going on with the look to it. Almost a Natsume Yujinshu look, you could almost say, which I've often compared to Shepherd. That kind of watercolor, softer palette, and yeah, great expressions in the characters as well. So there you go. Tajimi Reto, I love my manga, and this would be a great recommendation. If you were anyone who loved The Lonely Alien, which was the first manga I recommended in our very first manga recommendations corner, I think if you love that one, you'll love this one because the mindset of the author is kind of in the same ballpark, I would say. So there you go, manga recommendation corner. And Lord knows I've got a stack full of these to throw at you in the future. So if you don't like them, tough luck on you.
Haiku challenge.
And now the segment that I unofficially call Enzo, you must have been crazy when you thought of this, which is our haiku challenge, where I put myself on the spot and rely on the kindness of my co-host to not screw me over too badly. And I have to come up with a haiku on the spot, more or less, based on a theme which I was not aware of when we started. So I have no idea what Setsuken is going to give me to write a haiku about. But I will throw the floor over to you. What is my haiku theme for the week, Setsuken?
And as I like to do before we get into it, I want to throw a little tidbit here. So in our weekly document that we prepare for each episode, I actually asked Guardian Enzo if he wanted me to tell him this beforehand. And credit to the man, he did not play a cheater game here. He said he would totally respect the rules that he set out, so he really doesn't know what I'm going to ask him. And I think it's cute that he thinks that I'm going to be kind about this. So these generally happen at the end of the episode. So we've been recording for a while, so I'll see how. I'm not going to be kind to him at all. So, Guardian Enzo, what you're
Yeah.
going to compose a haiku on is serenity. The word serenity.
The word serenity? Wow. Okay. Serenity. Okay. Let's see. Maybe you could fill some airtime here while I think about this, or shall I just think out loud?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, go ahead. So,
Serenity.
listeners, I think that what's interesting about how we're doing things here is Guardian Enzo is definitely being the more experimental of the two of us, adding in these new sections, and I think I am very much. I like to have a particular structure, and I go with it, and so I think it's been an interesting shift for me and for us as well. We've been a little bit more fluid with our podcast as of late, and I think for those of you looking for something more regular, I apologize, but at the same time, I think it's also good to be flexible, and I think thinking on our feet is leading to some good content. So hopefully, you're enjoying that. As I'm having to think up.
All right, no, I'm ready. I'm ready.
All right, let's
Okay.
hear it, man.
What's serenity? That's what Setsuken just asked. Well, hell if I know.
Not what I was expecting, but it works.
All right, there you go. So for our listeners who are preparing their shodo, their calligraphy, then they will do this and frame it and put them on their wall in their tea rooms at home. What's serenity? That's what Setsuken just asked. Well, hell if I know. And not half bad, even if I don't say so myself on the spot. There you go. So that is our haiku for the week. And I think it's only fitting that whether I'm asked or not, and next week it's actually Setsuken's turn to host, but because it's premiering and because I have done so in the past, I will voluntarily propose a haiku next week because I think it should always do a haiku whenever haiku starts a new season.
Brain just melted. That's a tongue twister right there.
Yeah.
Can you say that fast 5 times?
Haiku.
I
Was
think
that
you messed
5?
it up a couple.
Oh,
I
did
think
not.
you said haiku twice. Anyway.
All right. Haiku segment over.
Yep.
And that brings us, our dear listeners, to the close of yet another Notaku Anime Chat. And I hope you enjoyed our very special listener question focused episode this week. As always, it's been a real pleasure to share our time with you. And Setsuken, as always, thank you very much for being a wonderful co-host. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure, always and forever.
And we'll see yous all next week. Stay frosty.